Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and we return to September of 1983 for The Big Con. I'm your host, Nathan P. Butler, and as noted, the story we're looking at is entitled The Big Con. It is issue number 79 of the Marvel series. We have here Lando in his disguise as Captain Drebble, based on the previous character of Drebble that we saw a few issues back that Lando ran afoul of and will continue to run afoul of for a while. And he has a wanted poster there with a picture of Han Solo and Chewbacca that he's crushing there in his hands. This is the second to last issue to be released storyline-wise that'll take place prior to Return of the Jedi. We only have one more left after this one. You'll find it, by the way, also in the pages of Star Wars Omnibus A Long Time Ago, Volume 4. However, you can also find this, if you picked up that Prestige format series, in the pages of Classic Star Wars A Long Time Ago, issue number 4. With Luke there on the cover from the concept art. This is also in there with The Search Begins and Death in the City of Bone, which we saw recently with the Mandalorian stories, and the story Jawas of Doom, which will be the first after Return of the Jedi to be released by Marvel, at least from a continuity standpoint, not a publishing time period standpoint. Bear in mind, of course, that June, July, August, and September was when they were putting out the adaptation of Return of the Jedi, so this is actually coming out the same month as the end of Return of the Jedi from Marvel's perspective, though of course the film had already been out, 4 months at that point? Now, as you may recall, prior to that weird issue Hoth stuff that was sort of a filler issue, we had this circumstance where the Rebels started to think that maybe Han Solo would run across the same information that Tay Vanis did, which might make it extra important to find Han Solo, because they're still looking for Tay Vanis' information. Leia and Luke and Pliff went off on their own mission and wound up on Cabray and wound up running afoul of that bizarre or I guess not running afoul of, there was that Lashby, the little furry dude who wound up seeing Leia sing and became all hulked out and stuff. But beyond that, we also were told, basically, that Lando and Chewbacca and the droids were on another mission, not using the Millennium Falcon, because the Millennium Falcon was what Leia and Luke were using. Well, this is where we finally see that other mission. And it also is one of those times where we see a bizarre timing placement inside these omnibi, inside the omnibus editions, and in Marvel's run itself. Remember, 2 issues ago was a story that had set this up, Chantanus of the Stars. Then, instead of going straight to the Big Con, we wound up with that odd story thrown in the middle that has Luke and Leia, and fortunately another character who is black, who's not Lando, who show up there to find Wedge Antilles, etc., etc. That story that got kind of tossed out of continuity for the most part. Now we pick up with Lando's side of the mission. They probably should have been back to back. We're also back, of course, to Mary Jo Duffy doing the writing, though credited as Jo Duffy at this point, and Ron Friends doing the breakdown with Tom Palmer, finishing it all up with the inks and whatnot. But in the omnibus, we have a bizarre situation. Kind of like what we had with the Shade Shine annual. It's like they put the annual in without really caring where they put it in, and it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. The annual was released in August of 1983, and I guess they must have been going for publication order here, because the Chantanus of the Stars storyline had been in, I guess it was July of that year, and it was supposed to go straight to, of course, the Big Con, says down there at the bottom. And then we get Hoth stuff, which granted publishing-wise makes sense because that was August, right after that July issue. And then because it came out in August as well, presumably, we have the 3rd Star Wars annual being tossed in here prior to then moving on, after that, finally to the Big Con. So from a publishing standpoint, it sort of makes sense to have done it the way that they did it, but continuity-wise, if someone was actually reading this and trying to read it in order, it would make no sense whatsoever, because the 3rd annual has Luke and Leia and Lando and such. They're all back together again on a mission to Belderone. So, logically speaking, the order in which it shows up in here makes no story-reading continuity sense. But at least this time it makes sense in publication order, whereas Shade Shine, the 2nd annual, didn't even make sense in that regard, at least not directly. So, what do we have here? Hello, what have we here? We have Lando in his disguise. Now, let me say that Lando in his disguise as Captain Drebble, kind of showing it here on the original issue, kind of dashing based on Captain Harlock from the anime and such. But if you look at him here, the way you tell that's Lando, I gotta tell you, is basically the skin tone. because there aren't a whole lot of black characters at this point. And you might say, well, they don't call them black in Star Wars. Apparently they do, based on annual number 3. We'll see that as we see that issue. But if you actually go and you look at this when it showed up in the A Long Time Ago series, were we supposed to know that was Lando? I mean, literally, the distinctive features of Lando are so well covered that, you know, the mustache is fairly thin, he's got an eye patch on, he's got the different hair, and it's all done in black and white with no different shading to his skin tone or anything. It's very hard to tell that that's supposed to be Lando. Threw off some people when this was first released. I let a couple people borrow my copy, and they were like, wait a second, who is... Oh, that's Lando. Didn't really get it at first. So I say Lando as Captain Drebble, using that name so that if he gets in trouble, it falls on the other guy who was ticked off at him anyway, is on a planet to look for clues about Han Solo. The planet is Arcan 4, and he runs into Limo and Sanda here, our orange-haired folks here. Not red, that is bright freaking orange there. And they are, that is Limo and Sanda, this brother and sister team, they are at this point after 2 relics. And these relics are known as the Dancing Goddess and the Minstrel. And they are of great value, and Lando is there as Drebble, and he suggested to them, hey, you know who'd be good to find this, who's got a good eye for rare antiques and finding lost artifacts such as this? That would be Han Solo. Of course, part of you is saying, I get it, I know where this is coming from. Han Solo, played by Harrison Ford also playing Indiana Jones, that's where the connection is. But remember, back in the Stenax Shuffle fairly recently, I believe it was issue number 70, we had seen when they introduced, you know, Danny and Rick Duel and Cheeto and all them, that Han was among the group of rebels who found the god Vol on Stenax, or on Stenos, for the Stenaxes that let them fly and everything again. So that gives him this idea of, you know, hey, he's got a bit of a reputation for this, though not really. It's a con. It's the big con. The idea here is that he can convince the others to hopefully help him find out where Han Solo is. And that way they'd be able to track him down, because they think, well, we need to find him for our purposes, and he might let Lando know, or Lando could follow them, etc., etc. Either way, it might lead them to Han. And it really sort of does, because they point out that, you know what, he's already been delivered. He has been delivered to Jabba the Hutt. Boba Fett has been paid. Han's in carbonite or out of carbonite, either way, on Tatooine at Jabba's palace. So that is confirmed here, setting up, of course, the fact that in Return of the Jedi, they know he is at Jabba's palace and are doing the mission to Tatooine and such. Unfortunately, the others managed to get Lando just a little bit tipsy, and he names Chewie by name, Chewie, instead of calling him just the Wookiee with no name, which is what he was going by essentially here. And the big chase ensues until finally, at the very, 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 very end, Lando is able to get them out of trouble by flashing something he'd been carrying, this little statue here. That is the Minstrel. And when Sanda sees this, she freaks out, I'm rich, finds it, and fires on the others who are coming to tackle Lando down, claiming it as her own. Lando then reveals as they're escaping that not only did he have the Minstrel, the one that Sanda now has, heck, guy had the Dancing Goddess too. He won them in a high-stakes card game, basically. So, at this point, Lando's got both of them. He knew where they were all along. It was all a ruse to try to find out what's going on with Han, and now they know. And knowing is half the battle, unless you're facing a Hutt, in which case it's like probably a quarter of the battle. So what we have here, it's kind of a continuation of what we saw in Chantanus of the Stars. It's the other side of the coin. It's Lando and Chewie's mission, and it does introduce the Minstrel and the Dancing Goddess, which you might think of as just kind of throwaway things for this story. It'll turn out they will play a somewhat larger role as they show up in 1 or 2 other issues of the Marvel series as we go along through Mary Jo Duffy's run, which is kind of cool. So it's sort of wrapping up that whole hunt for Han Solo thing, letting him know that, hey, he's on Tatooine. So this begs the question, as always, is this story, The Big Con, an essential read? I would say no for mainstream modern Star Wars EU readers. Just knowing that Jabba the Hutt is on Tatooine and that's eventually where Han's going to end up pretty much means they're going to have to go to Tatooine to get him more than likely. You don't need the confirmation in this issue. However, from a broader scheme of things in the Marvel series, I would say, yeah, they spent so much time with the whole hunt for Han and all that, and they've sort of set up this issue as a bridge to future issues with the Dancing Goddess and Minstrel and such. It's not a super impactful story, but I would say it's probably an essential read if you are reading the Marvel series as a whole. So, Marvel series, yes. Modern, not so much. So with that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the readers.